Thank you for tuning into my testimony about how God brought me through meth addiction, out of depression, out of wrong relationships, and into an amazing marriage with an amazing man of God that He picked for me. And then He brought me into the purpose that He has for my life. And so, without further ado, let's dive into this testimony. I'm in my late teen years, and I remember I was actually maybe in the 11th or 12th grade, that time frame. I just wanted to go out and have fun. But little did I know that if you give the devil an inch, he'll take a mile. Because I ended up giving the devil an inch through, trying drugs and partying and beginning to start partying. I tried all kinds of drugs. I was drinking, and I never imagined where this would have taken me. I remember knowing that meth was really bad. But I remember this girl I knew, and I used to work out like twice a day. I remember this girl I knew, she was, had come back from out of town, and she was slender, and she's slimmer than she was, when she left. And then she had turned me on to meth in that way. And so I remember trying it, and I was like, God, I'm losing weight, and I have to go to the gym really like I did before, And so that was kind of the beginning of me getting on meth. And around that time frame too, a little bit prior to that, I had went through a breakup. It was really traumatic for me at the time. It was my first real relationship. And so I was heartbroken. And anyway, so trying that drug, I didn't know that it would be so addictive. And I didn't realize that I had a problem, and then I had a problem. And so I was addicted to meth. And so I found myself in places that I shouldn't have been, and, doing things I shouldn't have done. And just, as time went on, it's like all this bad stuff was happening to me. I just remember actually at one point I had moved from Kansas to Texas for a bit. And I remember there was just so much change that had taken place. And I remember starting to feel like when I would get out, I started to feel different. Like I was like a foreigner in a land or something. It was weird. And I felt uncomfortable getting out, and I didn't know what was happening. And I became despondent, and I didn't want to get out. And I was so young. I was like probably 20, 21, 20. And normally, and I was on drugs at this time, so I could have been out partying and, and all this and stuff. But I remember just I began to become more despondent and wanting to be alone more, and then to feeling down and depressed, and I didn't know why. And then I found myself just wanting to sleep and really not want to be awake. And so I was a horrible feeling. And I remember researching about it and trying to figure out why this was happening. I wanted to sleep all the time. I just didn't even want to be anymore. And it was really difficult place to be. And I was depressed. And I remember reading self-help books at the time, and just praying, God, please, please take this from me. I don't want to be depressed. And so I just didn't want to get out of bed. And I remember hearing a story at some point about a woman that had been depressed for 24 years. And I just could not believe that a person, if based on what I was going through and how I didn't want to be awake, and I just didn't really want to be anymore, that I just didn't understand how somebody could, the time frame that I was dealing with this it was so bad. I just couldn't imagine how somebody could be depressed for 24 years and be in that state of mind or existence. It was absolutely horrible. And I just remember, and I was on drugs at the time still, and I just remember, praying and praying, oh God, take this from me. I just was absolutely miserable. So I remember I had that I was going through, along with doing the drugs, and just miserable, and all this bad stuff happening. And I know eventually, it may have been a year or even after that, eventually it's like I came out of it. Like God had brought me out of it. I wasn't wanting to sleep all the time and wanting to not be alive. So, and I was so grateful for that, but I was still on drugs. All this bad stuff was happening to me, and I had overdosed. I remember at one point, I woke up one day and I was in the place I was living at the time, and I wondered why I wasn't at work. And it's because I had overdosed there. So, and but the addiction was like so strong that I was like, oh, I was so scared to like do any drug, but it was so strong that it was only maybe a couple days later, or maybe 3 days max, that I was back at it. I'm just so glad that I didn't die that time. And so, anyways, just all this bad stuff was happening. I remember there were just so many things that happened, and I could even see how God had protected me while I was in addiction. I was still, even though I was like on drugs and I was around some people that were doing more things that I wouldn't have done, or more, I was almost kind of a safe person doing drugs, and I tried to be safe and stuff. But I remember while I was in addiction, there are times where God had covered me. And, God knows what a person needs. He knows if somebody needs to hit rock bottom and that looks like they are going to prison, and then that's a rock bottom. God knows what a rock bottom is. He knows us. And so there are a number of times I can look back now and I'm like, God covered me. That was a miracle that this didn't happen. And also there was alcohol. I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning. So it was meth addiction, and I was drinking alcohol, and I would black out. There were so many times I would black out and I wouldn't know what would happen the night before. So between the meth addiction and the blackouts, I mean, that was my life. And I remember things being so bad and just wanting to block it all out and not even remember. So I'm sure there are things I just don't remember that happened because if I wanted to block them out. And there are other things, but I'm not going to share those unless God tells me to someday. So there was one time when I was with this girl, and she wanted to go to a paraphernalia store. And I was like, oh no, if we go to a paraphernalia store, I'm sure cops are watching, and then they're going to pull us over and then check us, and then we're gonna be in trouble. And she was like, no. So but I was like, I don't know. So sure enough, we pull in there. She goes in, and we back out and leave. I'm driving, right, and then I get pulled over. And this cop, when he came up, he was so you could tell that he was angry that he didn't get to deal with me, I guess, because he had been watching, and he was angry that he wasn't going to get to charge me and really stick it to me, and he was like, well, you're lucky. You better be lucky because I had just got a call. So you're really lucky. And that was God. Because if he had searched the car, then I would have had some charges, and I could have had those charges, and I could have learned a lesson, but that was God covering me that time. And then there was another time, and I remember I had been up all night, and I was driving home in the morning, and these two cops pulled me over, and I don't even know if they had a right to pull me over. I don't know if I was speeding necessarily, but I remember they really had it out for me like the other cop. And I appreciate, cops and, the service they provide. These guys really want to get me really good. Let's just say that. Let's take her in and get some charges on her. And so they pulled me over, and I didn't know my rights. So they searched my car, and I had paraphernalia underneath my seat. And so I believe, and they found some money I had, and they were like, how'd you get this? And they were just really hoping to take me in. But so anyways, what I was going to say is I was reading the other day about how Jesus there were two disciples that were talking about what had happened with Jesus, and they were on the road, and Jesus appeared with them and began visiting with them about, what had happened. He had risen, but so he's like, what's going on? What are you guys talking about? And the Bible says that their eyes, these two disciples, their eyes were restrained so that they didn't recognize who Jesus was until later on when he opened their eyes so they could see. And this very much, I believe that God restrained their eyes, because if they were clearly looking, they were looking very hard so that they could take me in on some sort of charge. And it was clear they could have easily looked underneath that seat and seen it. So I believe God absolutely restrained their eyes and showed me grace and covered me that time. There are other times that he covered me, but those just really stand out to me. Again, he did, in the future, he did discipline me, but those were some times during the meth addiction and stuff that he had covered me. And I look back and I'm like, wow. And there are a couple other times, but I won't get into those. But so anyways, I remember, here I am, I'm on these, I'm still in the addiction and just living this crazy life. And I just was miserable. I was getting tired of this. And I remember calling out to God and begging him, God, please don't give up on me. God, please don't give up on me. And he didn't. And I remember, I think it was maybe prior to that prayer, that my mom had come over to where I was, and she was crying, and she was crying because she told me she was afraid I was going to die. And I was just so numbed and, by the drugs and stuff, that I even laughed at it, just to show how far out I was. There I was. And goodness, there's just, I'm thinking of other stories now that happened that God had intervened. But so anyways, that it didn't happen overnight, but God did bring me to the point. And let me just tell you, he brought me to the point where I didn't want drugs anymore. There's no way that if God had not worked in my life, that he could have brought me to this. If God hadn't intervened in my life, there's no way that I had the capacity or the ability. I was helpless. I was helpless in addiction without God's intervention. But he heard my cry, and he brought me to the place where I was tired of the life. To where I was ready to be done. I wanted to establish my life. I wanted to have a career. And I remember God had given me this prophetic word when I was 12 years old that was just really beautiful. And I knew he had a plan for my life, and addiction wasn't it. And so I didn't want to continue. I just wanted to have a life and establish it and live for God. And so, anyways, eventually the drugs in the area had dried up, and I wanted to get sober. I wanted to have a life. I wanted to have a job, a career. Just, that was my heart's desire. And so finally the drugs dried up. I had this desire. And then my mom finally allowed me to move in with her. And so when she allowed me to move in with her, I began to reestablish my life free from meth, and we got a job and began establishing my life. And so I was staying with her, and I remember at this time I was I have very low self-esteem, because I felt that my peers were so far ahead of me, and I had so much, a long ways to catch up, and that I hadn't really accomplished much, and here I was. And so my self-esteem was low. And there was a place that there was an admin position at a small company. And that's what I wanted, a place that was where I could heal, that was that seemed kind of like a safe place, because at the time my mom was working at a call center, and I know a lot seemed to go on there, and I just wanted a peaceful place. And so the Lord did open the door for me to step into that opportunity, and that is where I began this job that I would have for almost 8 years. So over that course of time, I began saving money to pay off fines that I had to pay because I didn't have a license. And then I began saving money so that I could get a car, become independent, and begin to establish my life. And so it didn't happen overnight. And so when you're like in sobriety and you want to jump from A to Z, that is not how it works. It is a process, and it's a path, and it's a journey, and it takes time, and you have to stick with it. And so that's what I did. And eventually, I made the decision to go back to school. So I ended up going back to school. I ended up getting my associate's degree and then my bachelor's in business. And so while I was in school, a relationship had come to an end. And I prayed that, I said, God, you picked my husband. I'd never been married before, but I was serious. If I was going to be in a relationship, that it was going to be with a man of God, and it was going to be serious. And so I just said, God, you pick him, and he has to love you. That was my requirement. And then I asked him to tell my future husband when he saw me that I was the one. And so during that time frame, I was focusing on growing my relationship with the Lord. I was going to school, working on getting my degree. And I remember during this time that I was like preparing for the future, I'm in school and stuff, but I smoked cigarettes at this time. And I remember, if I was going to have a husband, I didn't want to smoke cigarettes then, but I didn't want him to smoke, and I'm sure he wouldn't want me to smoke. And so, the Lord helped me lay that habit down as well, and prepare it for the man that he had for me that I prayed for. And so 5 years went by. I had got my degree, and I was praying about, where I should go with my career. And the Lord opened a door, and that's a whole nother God story for another time, into the staffing industry. And so I've been in the staffing industry for 3 months, and I ended up working a job fair. It was a second chance job fair that weekend. And then my future husband saw me, and God told him, she's the one. And he didn't say anything to me at all. He said he was intimidated by me. And he asked my boss if I was single. And I remember her saying, hey, he was asking me if you're single. I'm like, is he even a Christian? Does he know if I'm a Christian? And so anyways, Monday rolls around, and this giant bouquet of flowers comes around the corner with a note that said, I've been in scripture over the last couple of days, seeking from God if I should contact you. Would you do the same? He gave me a Song of Solomon scripture and his phone number. And then the next day, he sent me chocolate covered strawberries with a card that read, you've never in your life been treated the way I would treat you. I didn't believe it because I wasn't used to people saying what they meant. And so I didn't really put much weight into that, but it actually turned out to be true. So we ended up going on a date that Friday, and he told me, he felt compelled to tell me that when he saw me, God told him that I was the one. And so then I told him that I prayed that prayer that God would tell my future husband that I was the one. But what's funny is we were both skeptical of each other. I was wondering if he was making it up, and then he wondered if I was, but there's a story behind that. So anyways, a story that I told him that accompanied that. And when it was with my parents, and it's what happened with my dad, and God told him that my mom was the one, and so that is why I prayed. And then when our parents were at their anniversary, they shared that, and then he was like, "Oh, it's true," So, anyways, but what's amazing is I had this past, and then that was, I'm sure that in the back of my mind, that was like, what is my future husband going to think of my past? But God brought this man of God who also has a past, and his was meth, and he ran with meth cooks, and he was a drug dealer, and he was a 4-time felon. He'd been in 6 high-speed chases, but now he was living for the Lord, and he was a respectable businessman at the community that loved God. And so we both had this past. We weren't living the past, but God brought us together. And what's amazing is he does treat me like I've never been treated. And so I have somebody not only to do life with, but that we both have this past, but it's all in the past, and we, have our relationship founded on Christ. So it's such a beautiful thing. And like God put together not only a marriage where we could do life together, but that, we have ministered to people together. And so he put a kingdom marriage together while also bringing a couple together that could do life with. So it's so beautiful in that way as well. So although God had taken me out of meth addiction, and I had been clean from that, I hadn't quite given up alcohol. And so I have greatly reduced it, but I hadn't given it up. And so I remember during the time while I was establishing my life, that I had gone out and I was driving drunk. And I remember one thing that I just for some reason never wanted was a DUI. And that's what I got. I got a DUI. And that was God chastising me. I did go through treatment from that and stuff, but and although I had greatly reduced drinking, addiction is like progressive. It's like sin. If you sit around and play with it, it's going to grow and grow. It's like you just can't give sin an inch, and you can't give addiction an inch. You can't mess with it because it's going to grow. And so I still hadn't quite fully removed it from my life. And so I remember when I met my husband, he was not drinking. And so and then we had drank. I remember we did drink during marriage around the beginning, and it might have been like once a year. And then we eventually went to reducing it. I remember then it was 2 years, no alcohol. And then I remember going on a trip and drinking, and God, he warned me, and it was like he was speaking so loud through this circumstance. And what he did was, I was at an airport, and somebody that I did not want to see me drinking, he not only put them at the airport, he put them at the very gate that I was at. In all the places of the world that this could have happened, this was God speaking to me. And basically his message to me was, don't play with me, and don't do it anymore. And I knew exactly. He was speaking loud and clear. And here he was again. It was like a chastising without the big punishment, you know. And God knows what we need, when He's correcting us and stuff. And to me, I did not want to find out what the next thing would be. So it was very loud and clear. And so it's been years, and I have not had a drink. And I have absolutely no plans on ever having a drink again. I have no plans on finding out what God would do if I did. You know, I just want to be living a surrendered life and not give place to the devil. Because when you play around with addiction or sin, it's just going to grow. So, but thank God, He is so good, that He loves us and He disciplines us, and that we can't fix ourselves. It is Him. It's Him through the power of the Holy Spirit. God can work in us, and He can change us, and He can deliver us. So what I would say to anybody that is struggling in addiction, with any kind of addiction, whatever it may be, you don't have to do it alone. When I was in addiction, I can tell you with the meth, and it had such a stronghold. I remember like thinking, I'd see people, they would go and they'd get on, they would have to go report to probation. And then that meant they couldn't do drugs. And I just remember, I don't see how the heck I could have done that. Like if I was in addiction, that would have been really hard. And I was just in a place where God had to intervene, and He had to change me, and He had to change my desires. And for some, that means He is like bringing us to rock bottom. And so it was Him intervening. So wherever you're at, there is hope. If you are stuck in any kind of addiction, call out to God. God knows how to work in you, like He did me, to bring you to the point where I surrender, Lord, I need your help. And God can do His work. It's a desire in you. You can have that desire to be free, and God can do a work in you. And if it means you need to get in treatment, then you get in treatment. But God can work in you. Nothing is impossible with Him. I encourage you to get the help you need. And if you're in addiction, to call out to Him. And I just thank you so much for tuning in to hear about my testimony of what God has done in my life. And God is no respecter of persons. What He's done in my life, He can do for anybody else. Just call upon the Lord and invite Him into your life, and open up your dirty rags before Him. Acknowledge, I have these dirty rags. I need help. Be willing to turn from your sin and doing life on your own, and to surrender your life into following Jesus and allowing Him to come in and change you. And He will. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, hit that YouTube subscribe button, and tune into other videos that will encourage you and challenge you in your walk with Christ.